All right, let's try this again. What do you say? Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome to my backyard. Now here's the thing. We were cooking in my kitchen and it irritated the fire right out of my family. Because it takes up a lot of space and it takes up a lot of room, and I tell them all to be quiet. So I got in the backyard instead. So I'm out here with the mosquitoes so that I can continue to try to teach you something. I started playing around with drumsticks a long time ago. It wasn't for a restaurant or wasn't for anything professional. It was just because drumsticks are cheap and my family likes them a lot. So the first thing that I had to do was learn how to make them in such a way that they weren't dried out and disgusting. Because chicken tends to dry out when you grill it. It's hard to get chicken to stay moist and tender on the grill. So the first thing that I did was I had to figure out a brine that would work for my goals. A brine being a salt water bath. Seasonings thrown into it that is going to keep the chicken from drying out. It does that through three ways. You put the chicken into the salt water, and just the fact that it's sitting in the salt water, the intramuscular tissue in between the muscle strands.
I have to go fast because my dog's eating a frozen bagel because she's going crazy, and this will keep her quiet for a couple minutes so I can drop in this little thing. See, I gotta drop this in because when I was reviewing the brine video, I realized that the most important part, why we brine meat, I explained very poorly. I'm going to blame the mosquitoes. There were mosquitoes all over the place, and they were crawling in my ear while I was trying to talk, and it was very distracting. Or maybe I just didn't do a very good job. But I'm going to do a good one now. Here's the deal. Lots of people eat chicken and they love it, but they very frequently find that chicken breast specifically, and chicken in general, dries out really easy, especially on the grill. Now, you can cover that up with barbecue sauce. You can cover it up by adding some butter, or, some sort of fat. You can you just eat the skin. But the reality is, chicken dries out super fast. Not a lot of connective tissue, nothing to keep it juicy. There is a trick, though. It's called brining. Brining works great on all of the lean cuts of meat, like pork loin especially, pork chops. Some fish is great with. Shrimp is wonderful brined. The purpose of brining is to get moisture into the meat that would otherwise be lost when it hits the grill and starts to sizzle. Because when it hits the grill and it starts to sizzle, here's what's happening. Inside the muscle, there are protein strands. They're made up of amino acids, and they kind of start off looking curled up. Kind of like my fingers right now, sort of curled up. And as they denature, which is they start to, they lose that original shape and they stretch out. But as the heat continues to work on them, they start to finish denaturing, and they squeeze really, really tight, and whatever moisture's on the inside, they squeeze out. Think of it kind of like a sponge. A muscle isn't a sponge, but it works kind of along the same principle. If you grab a wet sponge and you squeeze it really hard, you'll get out a lot of liquid. If you squeeze it still harder, you'll get out every last drop. That's what happens when chicken gets to 165 degrees, which is what the FDA says we should do. ServSafe tells us, get it to 165 degrees. That's where it's safe. Unfortunately for us, at 165 degrees, most of the moisture is gone. This is where brining comes in. Brining has two purposes. Now, it does three things, but it has two purposes. We want to get more moisture into the meat, and we want more moisture to be held on while it cooks. So more at the beginning, more that we hold on to. We get more in at the beginning just by soaking the cut of meat in the saltwater bath. It's going to soak up some of the salt water through the process of osmosis. Now, you don't really need to know the technical process. All you need to know is if you put a cut of meat into some salt water, it's going to weigh more 2 to 3 hours later when you pull it out of the salt water. That's just how it works. That's great. We get some more water in. But what the salt is actually doing to the protein is so much more important. Now remember, we start off with these proteins, and they're kind of tangled up like this. What the salt does is it allows the proteins to partially denature before they start to cook, meaning that they spread out some. While they're spreading out, that salt water bath they're sitting in, more moisture can go in between these strands. And as the water moves in between the strands, the connections between them start to dissolve. So now when I take that chicken breast, which I've just added about 10% or so of additional water weight to, it hits the grill, the thing that would allow it to squeeze together and squeeze the juices out normally, that's broken. So now it's going to hold on to more of the moisture as it cooks. Nice, right? And the third thing that's happening, of course, I've got some delicious salt flavor inside the meat. Because the salt bath is going to act like a taxi cab, and it's going to drive flavors into the meat. Nice, huh? So we got some flavor going on, we've got additional moisture going on, and we have moisture that's going to be trapped inside the meat and not squeezed out during the cooking process. 3 things. You should know all 3 of them. Or just know that brining's good and you should do it.
The end result is brining creates a much, much, much more tender product. So we're going to brine our chicken, and we could just put it in salt water. Absolutely, we could just put it in salt water. That is, of course, extraordinarily boring, and we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to create a flavor combination. Now, the brine is going to call for about 8 cups of water, but we're not going to start off with that much because we're going to get it hot so that the essential oils and the herbs and the spices has a chance to diffuse out into the liquid. Then we're going to get it cold because we're not going to put our raw chicken into hot soup. That's a great way to give yourself a nice case of salmonella poops. We don't want those. So we're going to start off by taking a lemon, and we're just going to take off the sticker. And we're just going to quarter them. Let's put that right there. There we go. We'll quarter our lemon. Then we're going to take some parsley stems, because I want some fresh parsley flavor in there. You know what? I'm going to put I want some more stem. There we go. And because we're adding a lot of salt, we're going to add a little bit of brown sugar, because you remember that sugar and salt are on the opposite sides of the flavor wheel. So if you have something that's too salty, you add a little bit of sugar, and that's going to make it seem less salty. If you have something that's too sweet, you add a little bit of salt, and that's going to make it seem less sweet. You're not actually changing the ingredients, but that addition will adjust the flavor. Go up one side, go down the other. Doop, 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 like that, works great. How much brown sugar should we add? Really depends upon you. Now, the sugar is not going to actually flavor the meat. The sugar is there simply to balance the salt. Sugar also does one other nice thing, is that it's going to help the outside to caramelize well when it hits that really high heat. So for this, we're going to use about 1/4 cup. 1/4 cup of brown sugar, packed, please. It means you push it in there flat. If you've packed your sugar correctly, what will happen is when you put it upside down, it will stay in a nice, neat little mound like so. Brown sugar's in. We're gonna take a bay leaf. A fun story about bay leaves. Bay leaf comes from the laurel tree, California laurel, the Mediterranean laurel. They don't grow in Florida, which stinks because I would love to have a laurel tree so I could grow my own bay leaves. But they've been around forever. They were a big part of Greek culture. If you won the Olympics, you would get a laurel crown, and a laurel crown was made from bay leaves. They are dried. They have a lot more intense flavor when they're dried than when they're fresh. And they're just absolutely delicious. They provide a nice sort of a sweet, aromatic. It's kind of hard to describe if you've never gotten up close. Next time you see a bay leaf, just crumple it up, get it next to your nose. These are about at the end of their shelf life. Bay leaves are only good for a year from the time that they're picked and dried. And these guys have been around for about 7 months. So pretty soon I'm going to have to toss all those in the trash. Probably didn't need to get such a big container. We're going to put in a little bit of fresh thyme. We got some lemons in there already. The lemon, the acidity of the lemon. We're not going to juice the lemons because I don't want all that acid. I just want the flavor of the lemon, not the acid of the lemon, because the acid will denature the outside of the chicken, basically cooking it chemically. And as a result, none of the brine will get in. The outside of my chicken will be leathery. It's gross. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Not to hold down on the acid. We're gonna put in a little bit of garlic because why the hell not? I'm just gonna squish them flat and toss them in. And we're gonna put in a full half a cup of our kosher salt. Now the thing about making a brine like this is, if I say half a cup of kosher salt, you have to use an actual half a cup of kosher salt. You can't just switch for table salt, because that would be much less. Last but not least, we're going to put in some peppercorns. Now you could also put in some fresh rosemary. I have fresh rosemary in my front yard, but in the interest of time, I put in time earlier. Get it? In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the rosemary for today. About a tablespoon of black peppercorns, crushed very lightly just to bring out some of the flavor. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get this. Grilled chicken. After we have brined it for 4 hours, we're going to pull it out of the brine. We're going to rinse off the salt water, rinse off any of the residue of the brine on the outside of the chicken. Then we're going to put it on a rack and let it dry in our refrigerator. We're not going to just cook it right away. Now here's the reason why. I bet you can figure it out because you're brilliant. I say this to people all the time. If you took a bunch of wet chicken and you put it directly on the grill, still sopping wet with brine, what's going to happen? All of that water is going to start to steam. And as all that water steams, the skin, which is now soaking wet, is going to have a tendency to stick to the grill, to the grates of the grill, no matter how well you have oiled that baby. A dry product has much less chance of sticking to a hot grill than something that's wet. Okay, so we're going to dry it out. Before we put it on the grill, though, we want to put on a rub. Now, a rub is another way of adding a lot of flavor to the party without dipping it in a sauce. Dry rubs are amazing. I'm going to put up two versions of the dry rub recipe that I like. The first one is called Ras Al Hanout, and it is a spice rub from Morocco. It is famous. It's famous. It literally means top shelf. Because what would happen is Moroccan spice merchants, they would put together a collection of their favorite spices, what they thought were the very best they had to offer, and they would sell that package as Ras Al Hanout, the top shelf stuff. What it has come to mean is a very specific blend of cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, black pepper, and cayenne. Now there's many more spices, and every spice merchant has their own version. They layer the flavors very deeply. Moroccan spice merchants are famous for that. So Ras Al Hanout could have up to 50 different spices in it. We're not making that one. No, thank you. We're just going to do a classic barbecue rub that, goodness, it is, my family just absolutely freaking eats it up. I'm going to make more of the barbecue spice rub than I need, because if I go to the trouble of putting all the spices together, I may as well make more so that the next time I'm going to barbecue something, I've got a little bit sitting on the side. We're going to use as a base brown sugar. Now, brown sugar does two things. One is it's going to help the rest of the spices to stick to the chicken as it cooks. And two, the sweetness is going to help to counteract the saltiness that's already present inside the chicken. Pardon me. That's already present inside the chicken. So brown sugar is the base, and we're going to use 6 tablespoons. Where is my tablespoon measurement? Here, tablespoons! There you are. Basically, I'm doubling the recipe. Because, it's just easier that way. That's 4, 5, and 6 tablespoons. Two tablespoons of paprika. This is actually the real thing, smoked sweet Hungarian paprika from Hungary. Every time that I go to Austria, I like to take the little day trip. It takes about an hour and a half to get to Budapest, and that's where they make the world's finest paprika. And so I always pick up a little bit because it's just better than American paprika. It just is. It's got a lot more flavor. It's not as powdery, on the tongue. It doesn't have American paprika very frequently has a texture on your tongue of graininess. The real thing from Hungary doesn't. So if you ever get a chance to pick up some Hungarian paprika, you do that. I buy it in bulk. We're going to add a little bit of some garlic powder. In our case, 2 teaspoons. Some cayenne pepper, because, heck, how can you live without cayenne pepper? That's 1/2 of a teaspoon. Nice hefty 1/2 of a teaspoon, because I want it to have a good kick. A little bit of dried cumin. Funny thing here, when we're talking about cumin, a lot of people pronounce it come in. Like, come in, help me pronounce this difficult word. No, it's cumin. Like it's Q-min. Cumin. Not cumin. Don't say cumin, that's disgusting. Actually, the cumin is... Actually, the cumin is for a different recipe. I don't need that quite yet. What I need is salt and pepper. I want a full teaspoon of black pepper. Bugs are coming. And last but not least is some chili powder. Now, funny thing about chili powder is a blend. It is not just powdered chilies. It has cumin in it, it has coriander in it, it almost always has garlic powder in it, and it does have chilies. But it is a blend. I'll pop up a recipe for making your own chili powder because it's pretty easy. And making your own is just better. And I want 2 tablespoons of that. I was using the wrong measuring thing. There we go. There's 1, and there's 2. Now, the recipe calls for a lot of salt, a good lot of salt. And I'm not going to put that much salt in because I'm going to be using brined chicken. My chicken already is going to be pretty salty, so I'm going to cut the salt amount in half. Instead of adding 2 tablespoons, I'm only going to add 1, and I'm going to eyeball that. So you put all your ingredients together. Smoky, sweet, got a little saltiness to it. That's going to be delicious. So we have our dry rub for our chicken, and let's get that chicken brining. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our hot brine and dump it right into a bowl of ice. What's going to happen is almost immediately, a little bit of undissolved solids in there. In goes our chicken. And we want enough liquid to where the brine completely submerges our chicken. It needs to be all over it. Perfect. So in just a little bit, I'm going to take my chicken and I'm going to put it into a Glad bag, squish out all the air, stick it in my fridge for 4 hours. We're going to grill it tonight.
I have to go fast because my dog's eating a frozen bagel and she's going crazy.
We're not making that one. No, thank you.